Johnny Carson had never stopped his show mid-broadcast. Not once in 30 years. Not when presidents called, not when celebrities stormed off, not when technical disasters struck the NBC studios. But on this particular Tuesday night in October 1979, something happened that broke every rule Carson had ever followed. A small voice from the guest chair said 7 words that would freeze an entire television studio, silence a live audience, and stop the most professional host in television history dead in his tracks. The cameras kept rolling. The audience held its breath. And America watched as Johnny Carson did something no one had ever seen before. How did we get here? Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. It was 11:47 p.m., and The Tonight Show was running its usual clockwork precision. Johnny Carson sat behind his familiar wooden desk, the NBC peacock glowing softly in the background, Doc Severinsen's orchestra providing the gentle soundtrack that America had fallen asleep to for decades. The monologue had gone well that night. Reagan jokes, inflation humor, the kind of gentle political satire that made Carson the most trusted man in late-night television. Carson adjusted his tie, glanced at his cue cards, and prepared for what should have been a routine segment. Earlier that day, a producer had approached him with an unusual request. A local children's hospital had contacted NBC about a special patient, 8-year-old Michael Torres, who had been battling leukemia for 2 years. The boy's dying wish wasn't to meet a superhero or visit Disneyland. He wanted to sit in the guest chair next to Johnny Carson, just once, and tell America about his favorite thing in the world. Carson had agreed without hesitation. He'd done hundreds of charity appearances, hospital visits, and special segments over the years. Children often appeared on the show, usually as novelty acts or part of larger segments. This would be different, but Carson was confident in his ability to handle it with the warmth and professionalism that had made him a household name. But as 8-year-old Michael Torres was led onto the stage by his mother, something in Carson's practiced demeanor shifted. The boy was tiny, almost swallowed by the adult-sized guest chair. A blue baseball cap covered his head where chemotherapy had claimed his hair. His eyes were bright but tired, and he clutched a worn piece of paper in his small hands like it contained the most important words in the world. Carson leaned forward, his voice taking on the gentle tone he reserved for children and elderly guests. "Well, Michael, I understand you wanted to come on the show tonight to tell us about something very special to you. Is that right?" Michael nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Carson." The audience, sensing this was different from Carson's usual comedic interviews, fell into an attentive silence. Even Doc Severinsen's orchestra had softened their background music to barely audible levels. "What would you like to tell us about?" Carson asked, his professional instincts guiding him to keep the conversation flowing while his human instincts told him to tread carefully. Michael looked down at the paper in his hands, then back up at Carson with eyes that seemed far too knowing for an 8-year-old. "I wanted to tell everyone about my mom," he said quietly. "Because I won't be here much longer, and I need them to know how good she is." Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. The practice rhythm of television, the careful timing, the commercial breaks, the orchestrated flow of entertainment, came to a complete halt. Carson's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. In 30 years of broadcasting, he had never been rendered speechless by a guest. The boy's simple, matter-of-fact statement hung in the air like a prayer. Behind the cameras, producers shifted nervously. This was live television. There were commercial breaks to hit, time slots to maintain, FCC regulations about content. But Carson made no move to redirect the conversation, to lighten the mood, or to cut to commercial. Instead, he did something that violated every rule of television hosting. He stood up. Carson rose from his chair, walked around the desk, and knelt down beside Michael's guest chair so they were at eye level. The cameras, unsure what to do, kept rolling. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching their familiar host break character completely. "Tell me about your mom, Michael," Carson said softly, and for the first time in decades of broadcasting, his voice carried no performance, no polish, no professional distance. It was just one human being asking another to share something important. Michael's small hands unfolded the piece of paper. "I wrote some things down," he said, "because I wanted to get them right." What followed was the most extraordinary 7 minutes in television history. Michael Torres, 8 years old and dying, read from his handwritten list of reasons why his mother was the best person in the world. His voice was quiet but clear, and Carson remained kneeling beside him, occasionally asking gentle questions that drew out more details. Michael talked about how his mother slept in the hospital chair beside his bed every night for 2 years, how she learned to braid the wigs she bought him, how she still sang him lullabies when the pain was too much for him to sleep. He talked about how she worked 2 jobs to pay for treatments insurance wouldn't cover, and how she never, ever let him see her cry, though he knew she did, late at night when she thought he was asleep. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. When Michael finished reading from his paper, Carson made another unprecedented decision. He turned to the camera, not to Carson the performer's practice camera, but to the main studio camera that fed directly to millions of homes across America. "I need to tell you something," Carson said, still kneeling beside Michael's chair. "In 30 years of doing this show, I've interviewed presidents and movie stars, comedians and musicians. But I have never met anyone braver than this young man, or anyone more deserving of recognition than his mother." Carson paused, his voice thickening slightly. "Michael's mother, Maria Torres, is here with us tonight. She's standing right back there, probably trying not to cry because she doesn't want to embarrass her son." Carson gestured toward the wings where a small woman in a simple blue dress stood with tears streaming down her face. "Maria, would you come out here?" What happened next broke every rule of television production. Maria Torres, overcome with emotion, rushed onto the stage, not to the guest chair, but straight to her son. She wrapped him in her arms as he sat in the oversized chair, and Carson, still kneeling, found himself part of an impromptu family embrace that was being broadcast live to millions of homes. The audience, which had been silent with shock, erupted in applause. But it wasn't the usual polite talk show clapping. It was sustained, emotional, from the heart applause that went on and on. People stood. Crew members behind the cameras wiped their eyes. Doc Severinsen himself was visibly moved, conducting his orchestra in the softest, most respectful background music of his career. Carson finally stood, but instead of returning to his desk and resuming the show, he did something else unprecedented. He walked to his desk, picked up his personal checkbook, and wrote something out quickly. He folded the check and handed it to Maria Torres. "This won't solve everything," he said quietly, "but it might help with some of those medical bills Michael mentioned. And I want you to know that NBC, Doc and his orchestra are my staff, and I will do everything we can to support your family." But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Michael Torres looked up at Johnny Carson with those 2 wise eyes and said 7 words that would haunt Carson for the rest of his life. "Mr. Carson, are you going to miss me?" The question landed like a physical blow. Carson, who had spent 3 decades deflecting emotion with humor, who had perfected the art of keeping just enough distance to stay professional, completely broke down. He knelt back down, took Michael's small hands in his, and said simply, "Yes, Michael. I'm going to miss you very much." The studio was absolutely silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Maria Torres crying. Carson stayed kneeling there, holding the boy's hands, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, 30 seconds of live television unlike anything before or since. When Carson finally stood, he looked directly into the camera with tears in his eyes and said, "We're going to take a break now. When we come back, I think we'll just talk some more." During the commercial break, Carson called an emergency meeting with his producers. He told them he was scrapping the rest of the show. No celebrity guests, no comedy bits, no planned segments. He wanted to spend the remaining 23 minutes of airtime just talking with Michael and Maria Torres about whatever they wanted to discuss. It was unprecedented. It violated every television rule, every contractual obligation, every standard practice. It would cost NBC thousands of dollars in reshuffle bookings and make-up programming. Carson didn't care. When the show returned from commercial, America watched as the most professional entertainer in the country threw out his script and simply sat with a dying boy and his mother, asking about their lives, their hopes, their favorite memories together. He asked Michael about his favorite foods, his best friends, the books he loved. He asked Maria about her son's sense of humor, his kindness to other children in the hospital, the little things that made him laugh. The conversation was real, unscripted, and achingly beautiful. Carson had transformed from entertainer to friend, from host to human being. The studio audience sat transfixed, and across America, viewers called NBC in unprecedented numbers. Not to complain about the change in programming, but to ask how they could help the Torres family. At the end of the show, Carson made one final unprecedented move. Instead of his traditional golf swing gesture, he knelt down one more time and hugged Michael Torres. The orchestra played them off with the gentlest version of the Tonight Show theme ever performed. Michael Torres died 6 weeks later. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The impact of that night extended far beyond television. In the weeks following the broadcast, NBC received over 50,000 letters for the Torres family. Donations poured in from across the country. A special fund was established that not only covered Michael's remaining medical expenses, but also helped dozens of other families dealing with childhood cancer. But perhaps more importantly, that night changed Johnny Carson. Colleagues said he was different afterward. More present, more willing to break from script when human moments demanded it. He began featuring more real stories, more unguarded conversations. The show that had always been entertaining became something more, a place where authentic human connection could happen in front of millions of people. Carson kept the piece of paper Michael had read from. It stayed in a frame on his desk until the day he retired. When staff members asked about it, he would simply say it reminded him why television mattered, not as entertainment, but as a medium for human connection. Years later, when young hosts would ask Carson for advice, he would tell them about that night. "The audience doesn't tune in to see you perform," he would say. "They tune in to see you be human. And sometimes, being human means stopping everything else and just listening." The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson ran for 30 years. But many television historians argue that the show's most important moment, its most powerful contribution to American culture, happened in those 7 unscripted minutes when a professional entertainer chose to simply be present with a dying child and his mother. The episode was never officially rebroadcast, but bootleg recordings have circulated for decades. NBC, understanding the sacred nature of what had been captured, chose to preserve the footage in their archives as an example of television at its most powerful, not as escapism, but as a window into the full range of human experience. Maria Torres still lives in the same small house in Burbank where she raised Michael. She's never remarried, dedicating her life to working with families affected by childhood cancer. She keeps a photograph on her mantle. Her son sitting in that oversized chair next to Johnny Carson, both of them smiling, unaware that they were creating one of the most important moments in television history. And somewhere in Carson's personal effects, preserved by his estate, is a small, carefully folded piece of paper containing an 8-year-old's handwritten list of reasons why his mother was the best person in the world. That piece of paper, and the 7 words that stopped Johnny Carson mid-show, remain testament to television's greatest power, its ability to turn a studio full of strangers into a family, if only for one perfect, heartbreaking moment. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop talking and start listening. Johnny Carson learned that lesson from an 8-year-old boy, and it changed not just his show, but television itself.